Hello everyone and welcome to the India Story. I'm Vikram Chandra. Next week, India's Finance Minister Nirmala Sitharaman will present the Union Budget in Parliament. It's going to be a crucial budget for a few reasons. This is the government's last full budget before general elections in 2024, and it will set the course for India in a crucial year where India is awash with opportunity, but as a global recession looms, some careful maneuvering is required to make sure it does not affect India. And of course, while the budget every year gives an account of the spending and the revenue of the union government, it's also sometimes a good avenue to look for signs of economic reform. And we will study during the course of this program which reforms are really necessary and expected this year to drive the India story forward. We're going to be joined by experts today to hear what they expect from this budget, including Arvind Panagriya, former Vice Chairman of Niti Aayog and a Professor of Economics at Columbia University. Also Rahul Bhasin, the founder and managing partner at Bearing Private Equity India. But before we get into any of that, and I also tell you what I'm hoping to hear in this budget, let's take a look at all the top stories from India that you should be tracking.
India is set to offer locally developed 5G technology and India Stack APIs to the entire world in the spirit of public service, says IT Minister Ashwini Vaishnaw. The India Stack is set to open APIs and public digital goods that aim to unlock the economic potential of identity, data and payments. The Reserve Bank of India holds the maiden auction for green bonds worth Rs 8,000 crore. Proceeds of green bonds are utilized for projects classified as environmentally sustainable. The second green bond auction will be conducted on February 9th. Apple is looking to scale up manufacturing in India for global markets as the country emerges as the preferred destination for foreign investors, says Commerce and Industry Minister Piyush Goyal. Apple already has around 5 to 7% of its global manufacturing in India, but this number could go up to 25% according to the minister.
Okay, let's now turn our attention to the budget coming up exactly a week from now and what we should expect from the finance minister next week. As the very name implies, the budget is all about maintaining a balance. The government needs to spend money. It needs to spend money on infrastructure, spend money on healthcare, spend money on education, spend money on defense, and it needs to pay interest on past borrowings. And to pay for all of this, the government needs to earn money, largely through taxes. And that's essentially what the budget is, of course. Nirmala Sitharaman needs to juggle the balance to ensure that the fiscal deficit or the gap between earning or expenditure comes down from the high levels of the last few years. A high level that was dictated by the pandemic, but which cannot continue forever. We're shortly going to be hearing from experts on what she should do in the budget. But first, I just wanted to make a quick comment. Budgets are often more than just that accounting of taxes and revenue and expenditure. Budgets are often about reform, about how the government is going to keep the engine of the economy ticking along. And that is something that we will hopefully hear in a detail a week from now. Of course, reforms don't only have to come in the budget, but it's sometimes a really good signal. And here's where I have to say something a little bit further. We have heard a lot from Nirmala Sitharaman over the last few years on tax reform. This is something that is often not spoken enough about, and perhaps she needs a little bit more credit than she's got. Many steps have been taken to make tax compliance easier, to reduce harassment, and to have trust in the taxpayer. The results, by the way, are clear and are very, very positive. Tax collections have shot up in the last couple of years. If you look at the buoyancy of tax, that's high. That is sending a really clear signal to the Indian economy and hopefully to the policy makers as well. If you are able to have trust in the taxpayers and in people across the system, if you have trust in industrialists, for example, and others, you have simple rules, simple regulations, less harassment, the result can be extremely positive. All right, let's now get the first of our experts in on what Nirmala Sitharaman should do in the budget. And it gives me great pleasure, and it's an honor to welcome a very special guest to tell us what should be in the budget and also perhaps his sense on where the Indian economy is heading to. Dr. Arvind Panagre, of course, was the first vice chairman of Niti Aayog, was a Sherpa also to G20, something that's increasingly going to be important this year. And he is, of course, the Jagdish Bhagwati Professor of Indian Political Economy at Columbia University. Dr. Panagre, always a pleasure to talk to you. You have been writing about some of the suggestions as to what you think the finance minister should do in the budget. So what would be your recommendation? If you were the finance minister, what would you put into the budget this year?
All right. So, the background to this is, of course, that India has emerged with flying colors out of the COVID crisis. This particular year, we are, even the advanced estimate of the government of India is 7% growth, which is better than virtually any other major economy in the world. I think most of the vitals of the economy are sound. So it's against that background that we have to maintain that kind of momentum of growth in the coming decade. So my suggestions, 2 or 3 of those. One, I think, and we can talk about that in detail if you wish, fiscal consolidation. The debt to GDP ratio is currently about 84%, which is on the high side. We, at least in the medium run, need to get to about 70% and perhaps a little further down later. Through capital expenditures have been raised by the government, which is a difficult task to do given all the other demands on the fiscal. And that is should be maintained. The government has been very successful in building infrastructure. Unlike most past governments, they have been finishing projects on time, and some of the very big projects which had been languishing have been completed and all. So that's an area which is both important, and given the fact that the government is effective in implementation, should get priority. Defense, I think, needs to get a bit more priority as well. That is an area which, again, doesn't get enough expenditures, as long to the extent that fiscal constraints permit it, that has to be done. Then I have some suggestions on the tech side. As a trade economist, I'd like some trade liberalization to restart. This government has gone in the opposite direction in recent years. I think that is detrimental to the economy. It also, goes contrary to our general kind of wish to be integrated better and better in the global economy. And finally, there are some direct tax suggestions as well. That's personal taxation in particular.
Right, I'd actually like to go through all of those aspects. That's a pretty clear laying out of all the priorities that should be there in the budget a week from now. Let's look at each of them in some detail. Let's start off with what you said about the imperative for growth. And I think it's important to lay stress on that and the background to that. The rest of the world is slowing down. China is also slowing down. India, if it can't grow at 7% per annum for another decade, then suddenly you're talking about a lot of prosperity, a much larger economy, the 3rd largest economy in the world. And from what I hear from you, that should be the single-minded goal for the entire nation for the next 10 years.
Absolutely. Music to my ears, what you have said. I think, and this is very doable, because in nominal dollars, in the first 6 years of the Modi government, we did grow about 7.4%. And at that rate, within 6 years. So that was the past 6 years, I would say. And in the next 6, if we grow at the same rate, we become the 3rd largest. We get to $5.2 trillion from the current base of about 3.4 trillion. And as you said, absolutely, I think, it'll be prosperity all around. The abject poverty will be history. And indeed, we'll be in the prosperity zone, with $5.2 trillion. The per capita incomes would be in the range of $4,000 or $5,000 per capita. So that's fantastic.
Okay, so that's clearly the goal. Grow at a fast rate for a long period of time. Now, the second thing which you mentioned was fiscal consolidation. Now, obviously, that part of fiscal consolidation, the runway that we were on, got derailed a bit because of COVID. And that's only to be expected. India didn't go quite as crazy as some other countries did, but we did get off the path of fiscal consolidation. Do you think it's realistic to expect us to return to that path right now? Or there is an election coming up in a year or so. Do you think there's going to be a certain amount of populism?
Populism will be there, but I think that can be accommodated on account of a few things. One, the government did actually put an end to the free food, 5 kilograms per person to about 800 million people that we've been giving. So that constitutes a big saving. Then we got the commodity prices in the world markets have come down. We had been spending enormously on fertilizer subsidy. That will, I think, go down. Likewise, oil prices have been coming down. So we'll make some savings. So I think there is some room. Question is, how do you use that room? Do you use that to further expand the populist schemes, or you use that to consolidate? And I think, agreed, this is the last full budget before the election, before the parliamentary election. So some populism will have to be there. But I think there is still, that still leaves us some room. Also, there is some usual buoyancy in the revenues. So all that gives you some room to, about 0.5 percentage point reduction in the fiscal deficit.
I think you make a valid point that actually buoyancy in tax revenues is one of the untold or the unheralded stories. It's actually been a lot. And that also shows that if you have reform, which has happened in taxation, if you make it light touch, if you have a high trust environment, if you use data, if you make compliance easier, you can actually be quite surprised at just how much taxation can start to shoot up, collections can shoot up. That's what we are seeing, that's the benefit we are seeing in taxation. Perhaps that's reform we need to see in other sectors as well.
Yes, and that is where, particularly the personal income taxation, it's written, with a vast number of exemptions. And that, of course, then leads the government to adopt very high tax rates. So on the margin, we are taxing, the higher incomes at the rates of 43, 44%, which then kills the incentive for people to work, and therefore, there is enormous room actually to lower the tax rates and the exemptions and still come out ahead in terms of the revenue generated. As you said just now, we had that kind of experience with GST. We also actually, we did some of this end to the exemption Raj and bringing down the tax rate in the corporate profit tax area. And there also, many people had sort of raised red flags saying that, the tax revenue will decline and all. None of that happened actually. Corporate profit tax has been returning larger and larger revenues year after year.
And that, of course, is the principle of the Laffer curve, right? That you bring down tax rates and tax collections actually go up. Now, are we going to see some of this, you feel, in personal taxation and income tax? The government did try this, right? They had two schemes. They said one scheme where you do away with exemptions, but not too many people actually took that up. To get that to happen, to move to that regime, do you think we now need to have a new system and perhaps a lowering of the rates that are out there so that people will take the scheme up? A simple scheme which everybody understands, lower taxation, starts to drive higher collections.
Correct. No, exactly. So the government did try in the budget 2020-21, they had introduced this alternative set of tax rates which were a little bit lower, but no exemptions were allowed. But there have been very few takers of that particular option. People have continued, most taxpayers have continued on the old system where they make use of the exemptions. And that's a very clear indication that therefore, the tax rates are still very high on this alternative set of tax schedule. So I think there is every reason to now start cutting those tax rates and make it more attractive for more and more people to actually move to that particular schedule. Eventually, of course, the goal ought to be to completely do away with the original schedule where lots of these exemptions are permitted.
Now, that's the revenue side. Coming to expenditure, you seem to be indicating that the government has been spending a fair amount on infrastructure, and that, of course, has had massive positive effects elsewhere. It kickstarts the economy, feeds back into it, makes exports easier. If you're building good roads and good ports and importing logistics and you have good airports. So is that something that you would like to see continuing? In other words, would it be your advice to the government to worry about the fiscal deficit, but do not allow that concern to slow down infrastructure spending?
Yes, actually, I go to the extent that if it really comes down that on the margin, it has to make a trade-off between building infrastructure and cutting the deficit to fiscally consolidate, I would sort of then lean in favor of continuing with the infrastructure build-up. Because, over the years, I have seen almost, last 20, 25 years, if the infrastructure is very difficult thing to do, this government is able to actually do it very successfully. And therefore, given its track record, the faster we build up what needs to be built up, because remember that we've been independent for 75 years, but country's infrastructure is still being built. We are not at a stage where all we need to do is, maintain the infrastructure that is fully built up. It is still not fully built up. And that is the reason I feel that, this government ought to really try to complete that task. And so, if the trade-off has to be made, then I lean in favor of continuing with infrastructure.
Okay, so that's a really interesting point to make. If it's a core strength of this government to be able to build infrastructure effectively, do it, even if it means relaxing the fiscal deficit. So would you have a number in mind? What sort of a fiscal number would you be okay with? Saying, that's fine, I think we can live with it this year and maybe, reduce it again next year.
Yeah. So, last year in the budget, we had provided for 6.4% fiscal deficit. We should aim to bring it down to, maybe 5.7, 5.8%. That is a good signal. I think, right now what we are looking for a signal, we are not in a kind of situation that there is a crisis or something, or there is an imminent danger of a crisis. That's simply not the situation. So it's a matter of signaling. And so, even if we bring it down by 0.5, 0.6 percentage points, that's a good signal.
Dr. Arvind Panagriya, it's always such a pleasure talking to you. Thank you so much. And let's see if Nirmala Sitharaman is going to take any of that into account when she presents the budget next week. Thank you so much for joining us.
Right. Thank you. Thanks very much.
And let me now welcome onto the program somebody I've been asking about the budget for many, many years. Rahul Bhasin, always a pleasure to have you with us, managing partner at Bearing Private Equity Partners. Rahul, a very important budget, partly because it's a very bad environment out there. Now, there's going to be some politics. This is the last full budget before the general elections next year. But the first priority perhaps would be to make sure that the economy keeps ticking along smoothly at a time of global recession.
Absolutely. And, I think that the fact that there hasn't been too much tinkering, I think is a great thing. And I think that our economy actually seems to be quite robust by all measures. I think we will get impacted to some extent by the slowdown globally. But I do think that given how strong a position this government is in electorally and etc., they shouldn't take their eye off the long-term structural changes which are required. And I think that I would be very excited to see some of those kinds of changes and introductions to be brought in this kind of budget.
So when you say not too much tinkering, that's an important point, because a lot of people say that budget should actually start becoming a little bit boring. Don't have radical changes in indirect tax slabs every year going up and down, or too many changes. And that's starting to happen when you get a certain amount of stability, which we are seeing in GST. However, this time there is an expectation that either in capital gains or in personal income tax, there may actually be changes, and major changes.
I think to the extent that the system is simplified and changing and making one tax rate for both private assets as well as publicly traded assets, I think that would be actually a move in the right direction. I also believe that one should not tax mobility of capital. And I think that this is something that I've raised before, that if a saver is moving his savings from one instrument to another instrument, he should not be taxed for it. If he sells A share and buys B share, I think that there should not be capital gains. And I think that the right way to address this issue from a practical perspective is that all savers should be forced to have two accounts. One is a savings account and one is a transaction account. And in the account, the savings account, whatever his investments are, if he shifts from A to B to C, that should not be taxed. But the minute he moves money from that investment account to a savings account or his transaction account, that should be simply added on to his income. And I think that would be the most straightforward, simple kind of framework.
So one of the things that you, Rahul, and many others in the private equity and in the venture capital space have been speaking about for a while is doing away with the differential that exists between listed equity and unlisted equity. Right now, both in terms of definitions there and the actual tax rate, capital gains on unlisted is much higher than in listed. And that's something which I know people have been clamoring for a long time, saying it needs to be fixed. So the logic of that is clear. Are you hopeful that something will finally be done this year?
There are rumors before every budget that this will change, but so far it hasn't. And I think that, to my mind, if it happens this year, fabulous. If it doesn't happen this year, it'll happen next year or year after next. I mean, it's inevitable that rationalization will take place. It makes no sense to have this kind of two-tiered or two-structured kind of, tax slabs. But I think what's, to my mind, much more important is that there are lots of areas which, the budgets and the fiscal policy of a government should address. And I would like to sort of take this opportunity to raise it in the discussion forums. And I think that one of the big challenges, and you hear a lot about this whole subject of ESG, right? Environmental, social governance kind of architectures. And I think one of the reasons why that's so popular is that often societal costs, environmental costs, sustainability costs are not equal to economic costs. And I think any budget architecture or fiscal architecture of the government should ensure that if there's a societal cost, an environmental cost of any nature, that is actually reflected in economic costs.
All right, Rahul, thank you so much for joining us with that perspective. Thank you.
Thank you, Vikram.
And that's it for now. But if you were to ask me for my 3 key expectations from the budget this year, it would be keep that infrastructure spending going so that the economy can be pump primed to that extent. Do make some reforms in personal income taxation. I think that is something that is long overdue. And above all, keep signaling ease of doing business. Keep that reform going. The more we reduce regulatory cholesterol, the more we make compliance easier, the more we ease harassment, the results are clear. The benefits are very, very positive. But we'll be back with you in exactly 1 week from now to see how much of this actually finds a place in the Union Budget 2023. That's it from the India Story. Thanks a lot for watching.